Greetings, this is Cliff Ruby, the Nostalgia Catholic, with another short story review. This time, it is not, however, an Isaac Asimov review. While I've been a big fan of him, and I still am, he's not the only science fiction author out there, and certainly not the only one I've read either. So I thought I'd take a little time now to spend a moment on another short story by another science fiction writer named Arthur C. Clarke. I mean, along with Asimov and Heinlein, he was like, back in the 50s and so forth, they were the big three. Oh, so, and rightly so. Heinlein also has a lot of really neat material too. But at any rate, the story here originally appears as, and I'll show the table of contents like I like to do here. All right, it says 30 seconds, 30 days. Arthur C. Clarke and page 106. There's a little squib on here, and it says, there were two men in a damaged spaceship, and there was only air enough for one of them, and somehow a choice had to be made. Well, let's take a look at page 106, where the thing is. It's got a rather impressive piece of artwork here. I love this view. This is really, it's a simple drawing, but it just really captures it. So here we have one part of it. It's this great big dumbbell-shaped spacecraft, by the way, and the story explicitly so describes it. So the artist is just taking his cue from the story. So on one end of it, you can see there's a figure standing in the airlock. There ought to be some windows and other stuff. Oh well, it's not perfect. Okay, and he has let go of this other body without a spacesuit, just floating off in space. And in point of fact, you can see that little bright star, the morning star Venus. Apparently, you've got regular flights between Earth and Venus, and that's what this does. It's a cargo carrier, so it doesn't go very fast. It takes, I think, 54 days to get from one to the other. So, knowing science fiction writers, that's probably a valid calculation for a certain kind of orbit. There is a caption on top which reads, two men in a damaged spaceship with only enough air for one, and somehow a choice must be made. Okay, that's pretty much like the blurb at the front. So, a novelette by Arthur C. Clarke. Now, this novelette surfaces on a book that I first read as a fairly young person, even before I ever got into Asimov, by the way. So this gets older, and that is Arthur C. Clarke's Expedition to Earth. Well, how did I get into this at all in the first place? I have a little tiny bit of autobiographical here. I liked anything about stars and planets and spaceships and space travel and maybe the occasional alien being or time travel or all these other things kind of intrigued me as a kid. So I remember seeing Star Trek advertised before the very first episode broadcast as, oh, I want to watch that. I'm 8 years old. I want to watch that. And just that very first one blew me away. Well, not long after that, a couple of years or so or less, the 2001 A Space Odyssey, the movie, comes out in the theaters. So, of course, we're going to go to that. And we did. And again, it's all these stars and planets and a very impressive looking spaceship. And I just loved all that stuff. And then later on, I wanted the book so that I could, know the story. After all, you didn't have videotape or anything. You'd either have to go to the theater or, when are they ever going to put it on TV? I'll be as old as I am now before that ever happens, probably. So the next best thing to being able to see the movie, which, I'm still a kid. I can't drive to the theater. It's a long ways to walk, And, obviously my parents have to give me money to go. So, going to the movie is not something I can just go and do whenever I like, even when it is showing. And, of course, once it's out of the theaters, although it was there for quite a while, it's gone. Nothing you can do, kiddo. That's all. So I still wanted the story, and I bought the novelization of it. Well, apparently the novelization has a lot of interesting material that's not in the movie. For example, the spacecraft doesn't stop at Jupiter. It continues on to Saturn, and at Saturn it meets up with the TMA2, as they called it in the book. That is to say, it looks like the monolith, but it's huge, and it's nowhere near the crater Tycho. So, but at any rate, it was a fun read, and it still captures the basic story. And I really liked that, and I thought, I want to look for other things. And then it turns out they've got these books that are also by the same guy who wrote that transcript. Now, this is the back. This promotes several spacecraft. And if you look, some of them almost kind of look like the front of Discovery, the spacecraft in 2001, and the main end part, basically. Not counting the little pod that lands on this weird room, but, the main part, with HAL and all the rest of it. So you kind of have this look of nice spacecrafts and space stations and so forth. Nice spacey titles like Childhood's End. I've got that. Perhaps one day I want to do a review of that. Earthlight, Reach for Tomorrow, Tales from the White Heart, and then this one here, which was Expedition to Earth. Look at that. I mean, it almost looks like the front of Discovery. It's got the same kind of window. It's got these little doorways that, like where the pod would come out. Only it's a different craft. There's none of that other stuff behind it, So, but there is this other odd protuberance here that is another Discovery. But it kind of gives you the same motif. The artist kind of based it, and that kind of made me like it too. There's a story here. There's a lot of stories in here I do remember that I enjoyed. The one I'm thinking of is called Breaking Strain. It is, in fact, 30 Seconds, 30 Days, retitled. Having read both of these back to back, the versions seem extremely close, very, very similar. In fact, I've only observed 3 small differences. One, there's a place where one of the characters has surreptitiously entered a poison into the coffee to be drunk by the other. But the other finally, after kind of chattering around for a while, decides to drink the coffee, and the first guy ducks out of the room. He doesn't want to see what happened next. He doesn't really want to see what's going to happen. The person's supposed to die. That was the idea. He charged out of the room. And we jump immediately to this scene, which we actually see in that first picture of the 2 spacesuited figures at the airlock, where, 2 figures, one spacesuited, one not, and one not is dead, and then the spacesuited one is there just, making sure he won't come back to the spacecraft or something. Actually, he puts some sort of air canister on that gives him a little crude sort of rocket propulsion to make sure he doesn't, gravitationally find his way back to the spacecraft, which would be kind of bizarre and gross. On the other hand, you got this dead, not quite naked, but maybe just normal, like land street clothes kind of dressed human being floating around in its own orbit around the sun. I just hate to think what would happen if that met up with a spacecraft somewhere. Instead of a meteorite, it was a dead human, going splat on your. I'm not sure that was a good idea, frankly. But space is huge, and the chances of meeting it were probably sufficiently small that maybe he felt that was a valid concern. And it's fairly large; it could be detected. I mean, it's not like a meteorite that could. And that's the thing. It started out with a meteorite that apparently is about yay big, and it hit some cooling coils on the darker side of the spacecraft, the shadowy side, I guess. And the air circulated, the oxygen would be circulated through those for some reason. And apparently, because the meteorite had blasted a hole and somehow something didn't detect that, the oxygen was suddenly basically all gone, other than pretty much what's inside the spacecraft. Yeah, kind of a marooned off Vesta, only this time you don't have Vesta anywhere nearby. You don't have anything. What's interesting about this story is there's another much more famous science fiction story called The Cold Equations. That came out in about 1950, 51, going off the top of my head, by was it Robert Bloch or Dan Knight or somebody. Anyway, I'd have to look it up. I don't remember. But it's a well-known one. They even made a Twilight Zone episode about it in the 1980s. And it's also called The Cold Equations. Basically, there's this spacecraft carrying these emergency medications to some distant planet. And they have exactly enough fuel for the medicines and the one person on board that's flying the spacecraft. and they cut everything close. Who knows why? It doesn't sound like a very good design feature, but there it is. Okay, that's the story. And there's a girl trying to see her brother at the destination planet and stowed away. Well, she's way too much weight. There just isn't enough other stuff to throw overboard to make it so her weight, So basically, she has to be pushed out the airlock, which is, it's horrible, it's tragic, but there's no way. I mean, you can't let the girl stay and the guy goes, which would be nice and generous because she doesn't have any idea how to fly the spacecraft and land it. So, I mean, it's going to crash in that case anyway. So he has to stay on board. She can't stay on board. There it is, and it's just terrible. And all he could do was give her a last chance to communicate with her brother through the radio as they approach the planet before he pushes her out the airlock. So, it's a very tough, harsh story. But that one's later. This one, if you recall, I showed it in Thrilling Wonder Stories here, actually appears in the December 1949 edition. So it's an older story. It is the basic same premise. You got yay much, in this case, air. Weight was the issue on that one, but in this case it's yay much air, and it's not enough what's left for two people to finish the journey from Earth to Venus. But the stress is a little different because either one of them could have, taken care of, while the ship doesn't land, it's orbital, purely orbital, and other local shuttles would come up from this planet or that one to do the, take care of the space to ground passage. Kind of nice modern space flight concept, which is pretty cool. But either one of them would be able to do that, and you just got these two guys, and obviously, if there's only one left, he could make it. The air could be pretty sketchy towards the end, but it won't quite kill him or make him too unconscious or unable to function. So, but with two, they will asphyxiate days before they arrive. But there's also, when they first discover what has happened, there's still a little period of time from there until the place where, from this point on, if both of us are still here, nobody will make it. So by this time, which they didn't want to talk about this between the two guys, at this certain deadline here, if one of us isn't off board, neither of us is going to make it. So it's as that deadline approaches that one of them, for reasons described in the story, decides to basically unilaterally poison the other. So there's a transition there, and I mentioned there was a transition between, or what happened was the guy runs out of the room, and the next thing you see is the scene shown in the picture there, going through the airlock, the body going out in the airlock. In the original, there's no gap, no nothing. The story just continues the story just continues straight through. When it was gathered into the book, a little space is put in there to kind of indicate there are little spaces. Oh, and by the way, this seems to have some chapters. The chapters are gone; they're just replaced with little spaces. The first chapter, chapter 1, hold in space. They got a hold, I guess. Yep. Okay, that makes sense. Chapter 2, funeral oration. Which starts at the part where it says, "It is surprising how long it takes to do a simple addition when your life depends on the answer." Okay, that's the first sentence of chapter 2. Then there's a chapter 3, tensions building. "It is a fundamental rule of spaceflight that, for sound psychological reasons, the minimum crew on a long journey shall consist of not less than 3 men. But rules are made to be broken, and the Star Queen's owners had obtained full authority from the Board of Space Control and the insurance companies when the freighter set off for Venus without her regular captain." So actually there should have been 3 people on board, which would have just made it even tighter. But okay, so you got the 2 guys. Alright, that's chapter 3. And then chapter 4, "The Stars Look Down," begins with the contrast between the meals prepared by Grant and those organized with considerable skill and care by McNeil was striking. Okay. And then chapter 5, In the Cards. It starts with Grant had already reached the door when McNeil called softly after him, "What's the hurry? I thought we had something to discuss." And that's what happened, especially right after the little break there. That wasn't included in the first one. He ran out, he didn't want to even see. And then McNeil, the one who's getting poisoned supposedly, just says, we've got something we need to talk about. What's the hurry? And he's like, what are you doing alive? Well, the two differences in there, the two other differences I observed in there. One says, has McNeil saying, well, I saw you coming, I saw what you were doing. You may think you did this great performance acting like we're normal, but from the stalls, your performance stank. For some reason, that gets changed and looked to. From the balcony, your performance stank. The other one was, originally there was alum added instead of the poison. For some reason in the book it's salt. I don't know. Small changes, but it's kind of interesting, the little stuff you pick up when you read both the original publication and the subsequent book publication of the story. They always have these little, almost always have these little changes. So, but it's a really kind of interesting thing, and the way it's organized is also kind of neat, because it really seems it's going one way, and then suddenly it's going a different way, and it turns out there's a very good reason why things have to be the way they were, actually. That they, you couldn't just unilaterally act, and even though I've given away probably an awful lot of the story, there's still plenty left over to make it a good read. And it's very well written, and I like the way it describes all the space travel and spacecraft. It doesn't read like something from the 1940s. It reads like something from the 1970s. The way the spacecraft are, doing this, do things like docking and so forth. It's really pretty neat. So it was one of the stories that I had really liked, and of course I was surprised as anybody else how it ended, which was the whole point. So I enjoyed that one. It sticks out in my mind, and so when I had a chance to get the magazine where it originally came out, I said, "Oh, I'm getting that." So it's kind of neat to have that, and neat to see the story with the original artwork. Well, that's all I have on this Arthur C. Clarke, 30 Seconds, 30 Days, or Breaking Strain. Thanks for listening.